What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of JAR. For those of you who don't know, JAR stands for Joe
and Amy
Review, and today we'll be looking at another Magic the Gathering story.
Whoa. What the hell is this? So, actually, in all seriousness, surprisingly, this was expected. So, why don't you introduce yourself, sir?
My actual name is David.
So, this is our friend Dave. If you have been watching our streams on this channel, which you should definitely do, subscribe and ring the bell, super important. You will know that Dave has been hanging out with us. We've been making a ton of content with him, and including the live streams, of course. And this was another piece of content that we were making because a while ago, and hopefully you'll have seen it with the thumbnail and the title, but we read this book, War of the Spark Ravnica. Now, this book, I would say, got mixed reviews at best, but Amy and I, when we made our reviews of this book, which was a 3-part series, I encourage you to watch it if you are interested in that, and maybe I'll link that either at the end or up in the iCard in the top corner. Either way.
It'll be here.
But feel free to go take a look at those videos to hear our opinion. But one of the things that we put forth in those videos was that we felt like this book may or may not have been written for people who were newer to the Magic story. And so, kind of going along with that vein, Dave, would you mind giving the folks at home a little bit of a background in terms of your existence with or your familiarity or lack thereof with the Magic stories?
Okay, so first off, I do exist.
Well, that
I don't believe it.
That clears that
up. So I am probably what you might call a Vorthos light, in that I am very casual with the Magic universe. I don't really play professionally in any capacity. I play every once in a while. And I have not been too exposed to the Magic universe from the outset, because these two are my good friends here, and I have been hanging out with them long enough. I have been exposed to the Magic universe through set openings and listening to some of the stories. I had actually been able to read a couple of the short stories, and I got exposed to it that way. So I do actually have a little bit of working knowledge of at least the Gatewatch, some of the main protagonists, antagonists, side characters. Not a huge, deep understanding, but I've got the basics down.
Okay. And yeah, in fact, those of you who are eagle-eyed and have been with the channel for a very long time, you may recognize that this is not Dave's first episode of JAR, to be honest. Dave, you've been on 2 prior JARs, I believe. Mm-hmm. One with multiple other people, mm-hmm. One with one other person besides the two of us in the, I guess, ever rare car JAR episodes. Because God knows we've had like
those.
2 or 3 of those. So
a car JAR that went far.
we did. We drove a very long time that day. But yeah, so Dave has some familiarity with the stories, but you, like you said, you would consider yourself somewhat of a Vorthos light, which I appreciate. But also, I mean, you know, aside from Magic stories, you are also an avid reader and writer, and so what if anything, can you explain to us about your background in that regard?
Well, a little bit more of the reading than the writing. I want to get to some of that someday, but I have written a couple of personal stories. I've entered some writing contests, and in general, I am aware and appreciative of the craft and art of writing, plot, characters, and all that, and also a bit of style, and just, you know, how to engage the reader. So while I was looking at this, I was trying to kind of understand that a bit more, take it from that perspective. Like, as little or as much as I understand about Magic in and of itself, I am also trying to look at a story just as a story.
Which is perfectly fair. I'd like to think we try to do the same as well. And so, if it was unclear, what we did was we let Dave borrow the book from us, and you read through it cover to cover. Over however long it took you to do so, which is obviously totally fine.
20 years.
That's impressive. And then, kind of in discussing the lead up to this, there were some broader topics that you felt like you would want to delve into in terms of your reactions to it and your feelings with it. And I'm hoping by the end of this that, obviously, if people have questions or comments, that's what the comment section is for. We would love to hear from you, so please feel free. But this is a little bit of kind of seeing if there's a proof of concept here in terms of a newer reader or someone who is less familiar with the Magic stories than Amy and I, who've been reading many, many, many stories, to see if that colored Dave's viewpoints with regards to the novel, and we'll kind of throw our 2 cents in, but we wanted to make sure to keep that to ourselves until now, to make sure that your view of the story wasn't tainted by our reactions to it, positive or negative, that you could fully give your own opinions without us sitting here saying, well, we think that you should feel this way, or we felt this way, and then whether that subconsciously or just up front swayed you in any way.
Okay.
So, with regards to this nice big old book, how did you feel about the world building? Like, this was your first Magic novel. You mentioned having read short stories and, again, those prior jars, but this was your first novelization of Magic story, and how did you find it?
Okay. This one in particular, and this is going to touch a little bit on plot too, but based on what it is, this is basically the culmination of, from what I understand, several arcs in the past, culminating in the antagonist Nicol Bolas's plan to basically just rule everything and gain ultimate power. So this was building back from, and I would say Battle for Zendikar was my first real major exposure to the ongoing saga, not just of Magic, but of the through line they've had since then. So from Battle from Zendikar, more or less all the way through to Amonkhet, and everything that's been going on in between. So Zendikar, as I said, Zendikar, Amonkhet, the Planar Portal, the gods and the Eternals army that had been building up to that point, just all the machinations going on, and then the infighting with the Gatewatch and their relationships, their issues, and their plans to try and beat Nicol Bolas has all basically led to this. So the world building, I had the fortune of having some foresight into this, so going into it, I already knew kind of what was going on, and I knew the references to it, but even then, there's a lot.
Okay, so you mentioned Battle for Zendikar basically until Amonkhet, like, all of that context was context you did have or you did not have going into reading this?
I did have.
That you did have, okay.
Yeah, because not only do I know a lot about the 5 main Gatewatch people, I know some of the side Gatewatch people, I knew about Nicol Bolas, but then I also knew about the major things, like the Planar Portal, which had been, I've been avoiding saying it because I completely forgot the plane.
Kaladesh.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That the ongoings of Kaladesh, of the villains there, and then the side plot that had been going, the plot had been going on there, it ended up being a side plot to this thing. It was the one piece that was now coming into all the other pieces, so...
but you didn't read those stories, you just, like, know the plot points, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to get an understanding of how much understanding of that stuff you knew prior to reading.
Well, yeah, like, with the, I forgot it again, Kaladesh.
Yeah, you got it.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
With the Kaladesh, I know that that's Chandra's home realm. I know of, like, the resistance movement going on over there. I know of Amonkhet and of their rituals and why the Eternals exist and the gods over there. So, like, the bits and pieces, I don't know every single facet, but I do know the pieces of those stories and how they fit into this.
Okay, because one of the questions I had planned on asking you in this video was how you were able to, like, if there was a level of, like, misunderstanding or just a lack of understanding that you had about the Eternals because you hadn't read those stories, but you're saying you understood that whole bit.
Right, and I do understand at least that the Eternals are basically the mummies of Amonkhet, that they are warriors who have been embalmed in Lazotep, that they are mummified and are at rest for eternity, and then they have basically been resurrected by Nicobolus and are controlled by Liliana. So, and that they are like their own each individual person. They're not just like random soldiers or whatever. They are like people and warriors who have gone before, but were still being used as an army. So there's some bit about that, because one of the characters, like as she's just rushing through them, says like, "You are free, so and so. You are free, so and so." It's like she has a personal. She comes from Amonkhet, I believe. Right?
Yes, Semlet is who you're referring to. Yes,
so
definitely.
she has a personal connection to all of them as she's slaying them again.
Yeah, and that was a pretty cool point that I enjoyed as well.
Yeah.
It's just the like giving you that little bit of characterization of her, so that even if you weren't necessarily as familiar with her, you're like, oh, okay, so she has that personal relationship to these folks.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you said, you could infer, even if you didn't know it specifically, you could infer, like, okay, she's clearly from here, right? Like that kind of thing.
And the other bit about that is that like there are a bunch of side characters who I may have heard of in passing, but for the most part, I have no idea who they are. Like, I didn't know really who Dak Faden was. I know a little bit about a Johnny, this guy's favorite. I know that much. I want to say I've heard of Karn, but I don't really know who he is. So the fact that he's a golem and all that, and like how they described him was, I had no idea. Hekaba?
Hekara.
Hekara, sorry. Never heard of her before. But what I liked about this story in particular, spoilers, I am trending a little more towards positive, but it's complex. The world building, at least for this section, was really well done. Even though it was overwhelming to try and remember or recall, or at least try to integrate a lot of names and concepts and places, just the guilds alone are a lot to take in.
Yeah.
I think with the amount of space that they can dedicate to each individual person, or even if they get short chapters, the book does a very good job of fleshing out as much as they can, giving motivations, backstories, personalities, and just letting them all intermingle. It was really well done, and I feel a bit more enriched with the Magic universe because of it.
Okay.
At least I do.
No, that's great. That's very important, and like I said, we can inject some of our feelings into this as well, just to let you know where we were coming from when we were reading this, because we, and again, for folks that haven't watched those videos yet, we still encourage you to go watch our reviews, but we trended towards liking the book, but also understanding some other things surrounding the book. We'll get into that in a little bit later, but
a complexity that isn't that doesn't come with not having the context that we have.
Right, because it has nothing to do with the words and pages and etc. in here, right? So outside of this, because we knew other things, we felt like, we had some of our opinions colored by that. So you talked about Dak, Ajani, Karn. What about, and Semlet to a degree as well, you mentioned the Gatewatch. What did you think of this book's, because this was kind of essentially the swan song for the Gatewatch. This was like the end of the Gatewatch era. And so how did you feel that they handled the Gatewatch in this story?
Ultimately, I think the characters are a tad broad, but I suppose they need to just kind of be that way, and they're not supposed to be like super duper deep, but they are drawn in a way that instantly, like, Gideon's the strong, justice-minded one. Chandra's literally the hothead. Jace and Liliana, especially with his relationship with Liliana, like Jace, I believe, has a bit more of the complexity in that. If you really want to compare him to somebody, I'd say almost like Professor Xavier from the X-Men, in that he is the calculating, smart one. He's the strategist, and he is literally the mind mage and everything. But he gets around, and he has his dalliances. And but then it goes into, because he has this relationship with Liliana, who is now, in this case, working with Nicobolas and controlling his army, that some of the stuff that they go into is his hesitation to potentially have to put her down for their greater good. Like, there's an actual sense of how much she means to him, or even his going back and forth between, does he actually love her? Does he feel manipulated by her? Does he even feel that he can explain it away with, well, I maybe just kind of wanted it and I just kind of fell into it, kind of like. He tries to rationalize his relationship with her versus his duty to save the world and protect the people as a Gatewatch member, in potentially having to do in somebody that he cares about, or he thinks he cares about. That, I felt, in his case, was the most complex relationship and was one of the stronger elements of the story as a whole. Like, I was honestly wondering, will he, won't he? And it was a big part of it.
Okay.
And for everybody else, it was like, yeah, they were drawn very well, and for whatever they needed to be, they were. And I liked them a lot, and there was a lot of, like, you can tell these people, like, love each other. There's a relationship, there's history, obviously, but then you give their pet names, and they know their strengths and weaknesses, and there's a solid relationship that really comes across here.
Okay. Amy, did you want to stay on the Liliana thing? I had a different question as well, if you don't, but if you did.
I mean, there's a lot to talk about in terms of Liliana and Jace's relationship that I don't think needs to be talked about in this video. And again, the lack of context that you have, I think, is what's important to have in this video. Because that is going to show what this book tells you about their relationship versus what a dedicated Vorthos knows about their relationship. So I think that's what's important to highlight here.
Right, and especially that, Amy and I were kind of talking about this before, that it seems, I believe we brought this up in our reviews themselves as well, but that we believe that was that's how the writers and or the company, the direction that they're choosing to go, and whether they're steering you that way or whether that's the way that it was always meant to go, that's kind of up in the air, but that's fine. We will leave that at that.
Yeah.
I actually did want to ask you, while we're talking about characters, because you mentioned that Ajani is my favorite. Trending towards the other side of the table, I'm genuinely curious, what, if any, opinions, because even when we were going over this in the beginning, I don't think you mentioned her name, what, if any, opinions you had on Nissa in this story?
My opinion?
Yeah.
I actually feel like she may have been the most underdone of all of them, but only because they didn't spend a lot of time with her. I kind of liked, just based on my knowledge, that there was this incident. I'm trying to remember where exactly she was at the time, but she was not... I don't remember what the story exactly was, but she was going through, I think, some kind of... is Zendikar her home?
Correct.
Okay, because after the Eldrazi, she had been just going through... I don't know if it was not even just a mourning period, but just like her physical being had been impacted by the whole thing, because she is the green mage and she has a connection to the planet itself. So after being ravaged by the Eldrazi, she is just not feeling herself. She did have some kick-ass moments with bringing the World Tree as her own golem thing. That was amazing.
Right.
But as a character and as an arc, she didn't really get to do a lot, and she was one of the, I guess, more neglected. So I probably should have prefaced it because I hadn't really thought about it, unfortunately. But the Gatewatch, for the most part, was well done, but Nissa, I think, in here was underserved. Oh
no, it's fine. In fact, I think you're more proving my point, and so I don't think you need to backtrack it necessarily. I agree with you, and it was because shortly before this novel was when she stepped away from the Gatewatch and kind of said, I'm not doing this anymore. And so despite the fact that she was one of the original 4, not even one of the original 5, one of the original 4, she was the only one of those original 4 that wasn't as well served. Here, when you mentioned the Gatewatch, right, you talked about Gideon and understanding who Gideon was, understanding who Chandra was, and then you talked about Jason and Liliana. And that's why I asked about Nissa, is because of the 5 main members of the Gatewatch, right, the Origins 5 from Magic Origins, Nissa is the one that you didn't mention, and it's not because you forgot, right? You're working off of...
I mean, it kind of is. You forgot because she was underserved in this book.
Right.
And if they had incorporated her in a bit more or spent more time with the stuff that she was doing in this book, then you would have remembered her.
She would have stood out.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's more telling, I think, than if you had a list of them written in front of you and had to talk about them in that way.
Right.
So I appreciate
Because when we originally reviewed this book, I definitely felt that way about it, but she's my favorite.
Yeah, I figured as
So
much.
it's easy for me to feel that way even when that's not really the case.
Sure.
Right.
In someone else's mind.
Sure.
So I think it's important for me to hear you say that because it validates how I felt a little bit more.
Okay.
Now, obviously, the books that are released or the stories that are released are very typically associated with, if not exclusively, are very typically associated with card set releases. Just makes sense. It's stories based on a card game, so or the world of a card game. So, from War of the Spark, the set that was released, if you had to guess, based on this book, a general approximation, if you had to guess how many Planeswalker cards were in War of the Spark. Have I ever told you this? Do you remember this at all? Or would it be an actual guess on your part?
God knows, but like considering that it primarily deals with planeswalkers from everywhere, a lot.
Yeah. So what I'll say is one of the critiques of the novel is that the set had 36 individual planeswalkers in it.
That's too low.
But the story kind of focused on like 10 of them, maybe. Like, think of the names that you've mentioned.
Mm.
You mentioned Semut, although very briefly. You mentioned Ajani, Dak Faden, the 5 members of the Gatewatch. Right? Did I have there? That's 9.
And then like Karn, Kev Tezzeret, Sahili Rai shows up. There was another one that she was a fire mage. I kind of forgot, unfortunately. Nixilis, which was I wanted to mention if I was going to mention Nixilis real quick. I've heard of him before. I know especially that he had dealings with Liliana. He's one of the demons that she sold her soul to him, but then kind of like was able to, or she went to his service, but then kind of was able to like retrofit so like she got out of it, or
no, there were other demons. He was not one of those demons. It's a little more. It's confusing.
Yeah,
I
there's
get
a
that,
lot to it.
but yeah. But he's a demon planeswalker, and so.
Well, when I thought when he showed up, I was thinking like I thought I kind of knew who he was going to be. Like he's going to be like, oh, I'm a demon, or he's going to be like scary, and maybe like prim and proper, like I am a demon and all that stuff. No, he's a kind of a jackass dude, bro. Like when he and a couple of the others, including Dak, like they have to go and do one of the shutting down the planar portal and everything, and they team up and everything. I was surprised just how much of a bully he is. He's just and it was delightful. He's not evil and scary. He's just a jerk.
Which is great. That's good that what should be like a tertiary character was one that still stood out. Like they still found a way to have him stand out for you, right? As opposed to a character like Arlen Cord. Is that a name that even rings a bell for you?
Barely.
And that's exactly my point. I've always, and even though it's a Gruul planeswalker, it's always kind of a horn that I've touted over Amy about Arlen Cord. Arlen Cord was a card in this set. She was mentioned in the book, but like, oh, who's that person? Oh, I found out her name was Arlen Cord. You know, and she just runs by. So
and that is the werewolf, right?
yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I forgot the werewolf, people.
So did they.
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? I mean, when you listed all those planeswalkers, and you stopped it up next to the list, I'm sure there's more that you could name, like these two here, etc. But like that gets you to 16. Mm-hmm. That's not even half. It's not even half, right?
And then just
36,
and then just like the millions of other nameless ones that just came in and got slaughtered.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And there was Domri Raid, I believe, was the first one that died. Right. Like he was the one who like
charges in because he's
like, oh, I'm gonna work with Bolus, and Bolus is like, okay, and then just takes his spark, and he's the first one. Mm-hmm. So like that was a previously named character, right? That we'd known for a while. So like again, all of these planeswalkers in this story. Those of us who knew them all and were excited to see what the story did with them, some of us were disappointed, and some people weren't, right? If your favorite character was Gideon or Liliana or Jace, they got a fair bit of camera time, if you will, like, you know, in the spotlight. But if your favorite character was even Nissa or a Johnny, like, they got less time. And if your favorite character was Arlen Cord, why'd you buy the book?
Just like... Then hopefully you got your refund.
So, okay. Anyway, I still want to...
Innistrad is barely touched on.
Yes. They talk about Sorin and Nahiri for like 5 seconds. Because they're like, oh, those guys are fighting over there. Mm-hmm. What? And again, you are familiar with Sorin and Nahiri because you were here for the jar where we talked about the fight between Sorin and Nahiri, which... was kind of a big deal, because you know that at the end of that fight, Sorin gets trapped in a wall. And we hadn't seen him since, and then he shows up fighting Nahiri, and everybody's going, "What? Where'd you come from? Where did you come from?"
There was a back door!
And they're just fighting each other, and that's the only context you get. So, fair enough, but I want to get back, I want to get away from that. Let's, for a moment, can you tell based on the art, do you know who this is? Do you want to talk about this person?
Yeah, that is Teo.
Okay. Do you want to talk about Teo at all?
It's Teo. So I understand before I started reading the book that Teo is a completely brand new character. And he, as far as I understand from the book, not even just based on his newbie-ness, but how he was presented, that he is essentially the audience insert. He is given a backstory. He does come from a specific plane and has his own trials and feelings and issues, but for the most part, he is just you, the reader, being put into the story and being introduced to a lot of things, including when he meets Arathia. Arathia?
Either way.
Because Rat.
Right.
As she.
I think I said Arathia, but Arathia makes sense as well. Thank you, DJ Matthew McConaughey.
I got it. Oh, I got it. Yeah, when he is first summoned to the plane, that he meets her, and then she basically, especially because she is the motor mouth, literally just like gives him the exposition dump of like where he is, what the guilds are, and what a planeswalker is, which is fine for the most part because he reacts to it just utterly confused, kind of pissed off, but then kind of starting to fall for her because she's just kind of adorable, and like I love her a lot. She's just a sweetheart, and their relationship was not actually important to the whole story, but it was a lot of fun to just see them develop naturally. And for the most part, like, I like to see potentially where he's going, because he does ultimately not do a whole hell of a lot in the story other than just kind of take the walking tour. But as a character, he's pretty nice. He's fairly fundamental as just like the newbie who grows into his power. Like literally, he's the runt of the litter in his sect of like the clerics or the druids on his planet, on his realm. But then on the plane, because they're planeswalkers, damn it. But then he, through trial of fire, starts to see the abilities he never knew he had, and like the geometric thing, I think, is actually pretty cool, and like it's a pretty novel, I think, idea for I guess what a magic user can actually do. So I'm interested to see where that goes. It is a novel. novelty in the novel. But yeah, like he does go through a bit of an arc and a bit of like growth in his own way, even if it is, again, not completely bearing to the story. There's some bits about it that kind of run parallel to the main thing and do help out in the end, but he's not the focus. But what I like most of all, even if it was a little disappointing that it didn't get far enough with him, because we need to see more, was that I think what tends to happen with newbie characters is that they tend to just overwhelm the story. They come in and suddenly they are the chosen one, the one with the MacGuffin that can save everybody, the one with the ability that can save everybody. That's not his case. He just kind of observes as the Gatewatch, who are the heroes, or are at least some of the leaders, do the heavy lifting, and he just kind of learns more about everything. So I thought that was not only kind of refreshing, I was almost kind of surprised by it. Like, they didn't go the kind of cheap route of trying, like, this is your new favorite character. No, like, just learn about him, then shove off. And if you like him, great. Well, maybe we'll go with him in the future. But for now, like, let the people do what they need to.
Okay.
That was a good idea, I think.
Okay.
Cool.
And so, did you want to talk more about, at all, and you don't have to, but did you want to talk more about their Rat, in terms of Rat and Teo, Rat and Hikara, Rat and kind of anything else from this book?
So again, I pretty much loved Rat the first time I learned about her. She was written very well. There were a lot of elements between that. She has like an almost semi-tragic backstory of she has this weird ability / curse where she's basically not noticed, and she's almost invisible to the only invisible except for the people who look for her and really try to like suss her out. Otherwise, like people, she talks about how she is literally just like shoved aside or knocked over because people literally cannot see her. And Hikara, the Blade Witch, was one of her best friends, and I had learned through the other backstory from the other characters that Hikara had been killed. That, I'm blanking on her name, the Gorgon? Veraska. Had basically betrayed the guild, or at least the people who were in the guild, and had murdered Hikara in the process. So a lot of the threads kind of intersect that way. But then Hikara comes back to life as a Blood Witch. Didn't see that coming, and surprise, surprise, I like Hikara too. Like, and I can see why they're friends. They're just weird together. And then the whole bit about when Hikara is resurrected, she loses her ability to see Rat. Rat talked about her constantly, was like mourning her and said how cool she was, and then when Hikara, even though mentions that she does remember Rat and wonders where she is, she can't see her anymore. And the book does lay out pretty well that like Rat is devastated.
Yeah.
Rat does not have a lot of people in her life, even with her family. Her own dad can't see her that well. So she seems to be someone who is very lonely, very needing of friendship, and just kind of latches on to people who are receptive to her, but that her best friend basically unintentionally abandons her. That's a good plot beat. I liked it, and it was very effective.
And I'll say the thing that we pointed out, because I think we both 100% agree with you. I think Teo, Rat, Hikara, those characters, among some others, were done super well.
Yeah.
And our hypothesis, if you will, for why those characters were done so well is because those were the only, of the ones that we've been talking about, those are the only Greg Weisman originals. Every other character has at least been written once before.
Well, Hikara is a card, right?
Hikara.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, Rat and Teo at least, as far as I know, are... I thought Teo was the only new one, but Rat apparently is also...
Rat is brand new, Hikara is brand new. And the only thing is, this will go a bit into some of our stuff for what we were talking about. It's a very long story, but this novel was released, let's say, step 1, this novel is released. Step 2, the prequel stories are released, which go into Veraska betraying the guilds, Hikara being introduced, Ral Zarek doing a bunch of stuff, all on Ravnica, on all the things that occurred on Ravnica that we saw in story beats in the cards from the sets of Guilds of Ravnica and Ravnica Allegiance, which were sets that came out prior to War of the Spark. But the stories for Guilds of Ravnica and Ravnica Allegiance didn't come out until after the novel for War of the Spark was released, despite the fact that a lot of things that were discussed in this novel reference back to the things that occurred on Ravnica prior to this novel that
Without you having understood them because you didn't read them yet.
if you purchased this book day one when it was released.
See this?
So that's step 2, and then step 3 is the sequel novel comes out. So you have it's a Star Wars situation, but not in the way that it makes sense, right?
And
You have like the main section, which is really the middle, that comes out first, then the prequels, and then the sequel. It was a whole thing. It was very frustrating and very annoying for us. And the other thing is, as a consumer of written media, I will tell you, the prequel stories was essentially, I say stories, it was basically a prequel novel that was released as chapters, 1 chapter a week for 20 weeks through a newsletter that you had to sign up for that they sent you in an email.
Yeah, it was gross.
So there's that. These are
So-
some things that we had some problems with.
So imagine being avidly into the story. You purchase this novel, you go to read this novel, and then the context that you need for this novel doesn't come out until after you've read it. And not only does it come out after you've read it, it comes out in such a annoyingly spread out manner where you have to literally sign up for an email newsletter in order to ever see it in your life.
that's coming off like DLC almost.
Yes. Also, don't forget about the side stories that were written, branched off of this novel,
Yes.
also by Greg Weisman, focused solely on Rat and what Rat was doing throughout the course of this book.
Those stories were great, weren't they?
They were fine.
Am I remembering that wrong?
You
Okay.
are. The gathering, the prequel stories were great. The prequel
okay.
stories were very, very good. They were by Django Wexler.
Oh.
Those were very good. It's just that I would have loved that context prior to this.
Yeah.
And so, Dave, you're technically correct then.
The best kind of correct.
Hikara was not technically originally written by Greg Weisman, unless you read these in the order that they were released.
Okay.
But technically, the prequel stories written by Django Wexler had Hikara in them first.
Okay.
That's where Hikara really shines, and then she's in this book. It's just that the first introduction that many people have to Hikara is in this book because the prequel didn't come out till it's a whole.
Well, I looked it up online just because I was actually so taken with her and I was wondering what she even looked like. Like, I did find a card, but maybe that was only after the fact, so maybe...
May have been after the fact,
Okay.
yes. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to the book itself and ask you about your feelings on the plot, and then mostly like the final battle and the monologuing and Bolus and that stuff.
Well, do we also want to just touch on the writing real quick?
Happily,
Okay.
please. So yeah, go right for it.
Unfortunately, like, I didn't connect the name at the time, but it's on the dust jacket. Greg Weisman is the creator of Disney's Gargoyles, and was he also the creator and the writer for Young Justice?
Writer for, I believe.
On the back.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I knew based on, I know a bit of Young Justice. Unfortunately, I haven't got completely around to it, but I did watch Gargoyles as a kid, and I was actually pretty excited for this. Like, I knew a bit of his pedigree and what he was capable of, and I, for the most part, enjoyed his style. I enjoyed how he was able to wrap dialogue and feelings and, like, discussions and rationalizations and a lot of the humor into it all, and a lot of the characters, I mean, again, with some of the characters who are a bit more broad, some of them do sound a little bit the same, maybe they can't be completely idiosyncratic, but there was enough wit and uniqueness among them that he was able to sprinkle and bring out that I really did enjoy. It made a lot of the characters with the ones that could be featured for enough of time to actually be brought out, and I enjoyed what he did. I don't know in comparison to all the other stories and a lot of the writers you would mention, but from what I saw, I was pleased.
Okay, to answer your question, he was the writer, producer, story editor, and voice actor on Young Justice and The Spectacular Spider-Man.
Uh-huh.
Very nice.
Anyway, so that's good. So you appreciated his writing style for this book.
Yes.
That's good. That's totally fair. So then, yes, I apologize for skipping that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then, yes, what about your feelings on the plot itself?
And here's where we get into a kind of split, because as I said, style, world building, all that stuff, for whatever it is, over here in the bubble, for me, fairly positive all the way around. Plot was the other issue here. Because again, that I knew a lot about the prior incidences and the machinations, that I knew going into this what was going on. There's a planar portal, there are the Eternals, there are the gods, they're covered in Lazarotep and all that, and they're going through the portal and they're invading Ravnica. Okay, I could draw the plot line, and here we are. And I knew about the Gatewatch, I knew some of the things about some of their other prior adventures before this, and here they are. I know what a planeswalker is and what they do. They walk the planes.
It was tough to figure out, I know.
Oh.
Tough nut to crack.
And then I understood, based on where they were coming from like Kaladesh, where these machines and devices and artifacts were, what they were doing, and how they were trapping the planeswalkers. I understood all that. So a lot of what was going on made a lot of sense, and I ultimately understood the plot and the Nicol Bolas's machinations, even when they threw the book itself threw the last curveball. I knew this was going into this was going to be like the actual end game. If this was if everything else were the individual movies, this was an Avengers movie of everybody comes together, fights the big fight. Then they threw the curveball of, no, this is what this plot actually is about, because there's one last step of, when the Eternals touch somebody, they harvest their spark, which Nicol Bolas then, through his spell, absorbs and grows powerful. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. And then when they finally reveal it, and Nicol Bolas has his monologue, everything that's been happening, stealing the Planar Bridge, annihilating Amonkhet and the gods, building the army, getting the thing to trap and to signal and trap all the planeswalkers, everything from all across the multiverse, culminating in this one fight, because he was bullied as a child. What? I know that that's a plot device for a lot of villains, because I'm angry and bad because I was hurt. But good lord, he's an eternal dragon. He has had unlimited power because he had been a god and then he lost them. I understand that and everything, but just like, no one will ever call me a runt again. Just go to therapy. Because at that point, honestly, that was like the cracks were starting to form, and I was like, okay, not the most original and a little bit disappointing that he has an egomaniac who has a inferiority complex, but a lot of them do. I can run with it.
Well, and arguably, I would say that those are both aspects of his character that have been around this whole time, if you know enough about his character. But I feel like in other instances, they really made that work for him, and I feel like here maybe they didn't as much.
Okay. Well, I mean, the guy, one of the first things he does is he erects a throne and a monolith of himself, so ego is definitely in play here.
Yeah.
I understand that. The second issue, though, was that I had noticed this too, because I didn't completely read the story, but I knew more or less what had happened with the Eldrazi and the Titans in particular on Zendikar. And I'm getting a little worried that they're starting to maybe make a pattern of this, because it is as follows. Between there and this. Calamity ensues. Whole bunch of people that you've been learning for a long time, including the Gatewatch, has to come in and fight. Everybody's getting slaughtered. Shit's going down. Pardon my French. there may be a crazy MacGuffin and the one last chance that everybody has. The MacGuffin fails. All hope is lost. Throw 2 Gatewatch at them and everything's fine.
And we were saying for Battle for Zendikar / at the end of Oath of the Gatewatch, that is Chandra and Nissa working together to take out 2 of the 3 Eldrazi Titans.
2 of them!
And in this, you have the Dragon God himself being taken out by Liliana and Gideon, working together.
To be fair, again, because things make some sense based on prior established character and just the way the system works, he was at least hoisted by his own petard and had his own plan turned against him when Liliana, in control of the Dread Horde, turn on him and he basically harvests his own spark.
Right.
A little lame as far as they were building up Black Blade, the only thing that can destroy a god, and then it shatters. Oh no, all hope is lost. So what happened? Gideon basically just gives Liliana a pep talk, and he absorbs her curse or something, like absorbs the curse that holds her.
He passed his invulnerability onto her, but in doing so, the curse bypassed her, went into him, and basically disintegrated him in the process.
To be fair, wow, legitimately did not see that coming.
Yeah, and honestly, I think these story beats are not bad ideas. I think
True.
the execution of them could have been better.
Right.
That's what I'm thinking that.
So yeah, I mean, I guess because as some version of the style of the kind of things I potentially like to read, I wasn't completely happy with the notion of just like, it was more or less that simple, and a lot of things probably could have been avoided if they just kind of went that route. But for the most part, in what they had set up and how it paid off, especially because it gives Liliana a chance to do the heel face turn, thematically it makes sense. So I would have at least been there of like, okay, maybe a little disappointing, but still fine and like acceptable. And then they throw the last curveball at you, which I don't know if you wanted to get into it before that, but yeah. Nicol Bolas is still alive. They were making it out when he had his own spark harvested that he basically gives the roar of, "This cannot be happening, dear God, no," and disintegrates. Apparently that was an illusion cast by Jace?
Either cast by Jace. Jace and Ugin, I believe, are the only 2 that know that Bolas is still alive.
Yeah. So they basically make the thing that Nicol Bolas had died, but he was in fact just severely weakened and taken to like a mental plane, like the meditation plane?
The meditation plane is correct.
Where Ugin, his twin,
yes,
basically just tortures him for all eternity.
Like you do.
Yeah, why not?
And on the one hand, the whole bit about, death is too good for him and the thousands, possibly millions of people, either the innocent who had been slaughtered outright or the people who had their sparks harvested and died horrible, horrible deaths just to assuage his ego. Yeah, death was too good for him, and actual, just eternal torment is more karmically sound. But on the other hand, you want to talk about Star Wars, this was Han frozen in carbonite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot, right? In terms of, you mentioned the Eldrazi. Mm-hmm. This is something that they did with the last Eldrazi Titan as well. Emrakul was beaten by being put inside of Innistrād's moon. We all know now that is, if we've been following along with the stories, that is where Emrakul is now, is in the moon. We later come to find out that the twist with that is the fact that Tamiyo was not the one that put Emrakul there, even though it looked like Tamiyo was the one that pulled out the scroll and cast the spell. No, Tamiyo had no recollection of casting that spell. No. And in fact, it was Emrakul who took control of Tamiyo and made Tamiyo cast that spell to put Emrakul inside the moon, so that Emrakul could come back out whenever she was ready.
And that moves, motherfucker. And that moves.
Oh my god.
So, it's exactly the same
them into
thing.
Thinking that they're in control of what's going on, when in reality, they're not even close to aware of what's going on.
I love it. Then it was like, so what was I doing that whole time? just waving my arms. I have this scroll, and I'm just like, it's my shopping list?
So that was exactly what they did with Emrakul, is what they've now essentially done with Nicol Bolas, which is, we have explained this way, I guess it's slightly different. Because Emrakul was the one that engineered her own demise, or visible demise, whereas this time it was actually Ugin and Jace, for all intents and purposes, good guys, who have put away the bad guy, locked away in his own realm for eternal torture, and yet, it really, all of us who have ever consumed, I don't know, any fantasy media ever, are aware that that just translates as, we're going to keep this villain in our back pocket so that we can make more money with it years and years down the road.
When
where
inevitably
we say
the bad guy gets out,
Right.
because the bad guy always gets out.
Right, and you just sell a set with Bolas returns, and it's this big scary thing. Oh my god, what the hell's going to happen? So yes, I can understand kind of being frustrated by that and being upset by that. Totally fair. It does, like you said, seem like their MO. Because they did it with Emrakul, they did it with this, they did it with
all the Eldrazi on Zendikar.
No. Oh, originally, yes, sorry, yes, absolutely.
They were like, oh, these guys are too powerful for us to do anything about. We can trap them.
Yeah, we'll put
That'd
them
be
in,
good, right?
Right, we'll put them in these mountains for 1,000,000 years and hope that's good enough. And,
That's somebody else's problem.
yeah, and oh no, they broke out. Who would have ever guessed? So yeah, and like I said, now they've done it. They kind of did it with the Phyrexians originally, because now the Phyrexians are back somehow. We don't know how yet, but we'll deal with that in the years to come, I'm sure. But so I guess, Dave, the ultimate question though is, you've read War of the Spark Ravnica. Mm-hmm. For the most part, you've enjoyed it.
For the most part, yes.
Now that you know, and in fact, I guess I'll ask it differently. When you were done reading this book, did you know, had I told you or had you found out in some other way, that there was a sequel?
I believe at the time that I had finished the book, I did not know, but I figured there was likely going to be, just because of the plot threads that they left open.
Okay. And so how do you feel about the existence of the sequel? Is it something that, if you had the time, that you would pick up to read? Is it something that you're not interested in reading? Or is it something that, oh my god, I can't wait, let me read it right now?
I am interested in reading it. I don't know if it's absolutely super vital, but only because they're kind of making it out to be now of Liliana had her heel face, but for the most part, everyone either believes or even knowing about her turn that she was still responsible for Nicol Bolas' invasion and the slaughtering of countless people, so she is considered an enemy of all the states and is being hunted. That's a good plot, and I like the idea. I just don't know where they could really go for it to make it anywhere near as huge as they would. That would be a bit of a step down, which is fine because you kind of need a breather episode, I guess. And there are a bunch of other things, especially dealing with the death of a lot of named people, especially Gideon. How does the Gatewatch move on? They've kind of inducted a few members, I think, since then, and they're still, if they want to keep going with Teo and Rat's deal, obviously they've got the room to do that now. But that's just a lot of extraneous plot threads. What will it technically build up to? It's interesting, but it's not the, oh my god, this is what they've set up. They haven't really set up anything other than just tying up loose ends.
Okay. So, but if you had the opportunity, you would read.
I would.
Okay.
Yes.
And hey, that's pretty good to know, because I know for a damn fact that there are a lot of Vorthos out there who, one of two things, either didn't read this, heard that other people disliked it as much as they did, and then when Forsaken came out, were like, yeah, well, glad that I'm not reading Forsaken because I didn't even want to read War of the Spark Ravnica. There are other Vorthoses who read this, didn't like it, and therefore were not interested in reading Forsaken. And then there were others like us who, read both. And I want to allow you, if and when you want to do that. It is an open invitation that you are welcome to come back onto this show and give us your opinions on that novel whenever you have a chance to finish it and read it and give us your takes on it.
Yeah.
If you want to hear it.
And that's a great
Leave it in the comments.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like it's very interesting. I touched on this earlier, and I think this is the thing that I kind of want to say is that hearing your takes on a lot of this stuff from the book and looking back on our reviews originally kind of leads me to believe, because we said that we liked this book overarchingly, right? And yet looking back on it, there's still a lot of negativity in the way that we covered it because, as we mentioned, of the things that surrounded this book's release.
Right.
Kind of the stupidity of the
timing of the releases and the fact that they were kind of getting authors from just out of the blue everywhere, and like they weren't giving continuity
the fact
to
that
different authors and stuff.
the fact that we knew who was behind this book being written.
Yeah.
I've told you a bit about that in the past. Not to fully ask you to remember it and get into it now, because thankfully, from what we can tell, Ding Dong, the witch is dead in the company at this point.
It was Scotland.
Which seems great. Yeah, exactly. But the fact that he who shall not be named, if we will, was the one speaking with Greg Weisman in terms of informing him of what they wanted to have written, etc. So that aspect, or those aspects, were in our heads when we were reading it, and yet for someone who is not as entrenched, not as familiar, and can just pick up this book and read it with either a passing knowledge or no knowledge whatsoever, that is why I hypothesized, or we hypothesized, that this book may have in fact been for newer readers, which I still put forth, newer Magic readers. I still put forth that that's a very silly way to do your endgame-esque story. That why would you have your final chapter written for people who haven't read any of the previous chapters?
Yeah.
But that's a different analysis for a different time. I wanted to see if our hypothesis proved true, and I would say more so than not, it seems like it was. I don't think it's 100% definitely. That is who, but it seems like for someone who was not as entrenched in all of the goings on with Magic Story, who enjoys good writing, was able to pick up this book, was able to enjoy it, found issues with it, but nothing that you were like, wow, why did I just waste my time reading this? I'm not. You're not offended or anything like that.
This is a terrible book. Nothing like I'm devastated because of X.
Right.
And that's really, I think, what the Vorthos community felt.
Yeah. So
it's nice to hear the perspective from somebody who doesn't have any of that smog in their mind to begin with, and they can just read the book and judge it on its own for being a book.
Right. And so, if it needs to be said, Dave, thank you so much for coming onto our show.
Yes.
This was an absolute blast, and I truly appreciated your insights, both when we were kind of discussing this beforehand and now in front of the camera. And I hope you all did as well. I really would love to hear people's thoughts. What do you think now? Right? Were you like Amy and I, where maybe you liked the story, but there was still a lot of negativity swirling around it for you? Were you just fully against it? You hated the story, you hated everything around it. And does hearing Dave's take on things change anything for you? Does it open your eyes a little bit? Because like I said, I think it does slightly for us.
Yeah, it definitely does for me. Like, I mean, it's really hard to get around the fact that there's so much, like, abusive bullshit around the writing of this book and the people who were in charge of writing this book.
Right. But if you don't know that, right, if you're a person that's walking through a bookstore
right.
and sees the Magic the Gathering logo on top of a novel and you pick it up and you read it, passing knowledge or no knowledge, that there are things that are redeeming about this book for those folks. Does that mean that's immediately who it was written for? Not necessarily, but I think that it's closer to who it was written for than folks like Amy and I, who have been so entrenched in the stories, the sets, etc.
And the goings on.
Right. So, like I said, thank you for being here, Dave. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you to all of you for watching. I genuinely want this conversation to continue, as always, in the comments. We always want that conversation to continue in the comments, but I really want people's opinions, because this was, I don't even know that divisive is the word. I feel like, and again, for people like Amy and I feel like this was just hated. You know what I mean? So like,
Well, I mean, for people like us, it was very much a slap in the face.
Yes. So now that we're getting a different perspective, I want to hear people's feelings on that.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's a very interesting thing to be able to do, and I'm so grateful that we were able to actually do that and get that outside perspective a little bit. So do you appreciate that? Do you believe that? Do you want to go along with it? I would love to hear your thoughts, and I think that opening your mind to those outside perspectives is important, and it's something that we haven't had the opportunity to do much on this channel and or as a duo here. So, and I think it's a great way for us to join you and Dave in showing off our
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
That's right, I did
I
it.
wasn't sure if you were going to have me do it or Dave do it.
We didn't talk about it with Dave beforehand, so you. But
I was waiting a minute or two to like see if he was going to do it.
So thank you all so very much for watching. I do hope everybody enjoyed. As I said, if you've been following along with our streams on this channel, you've seen Dave already, but if you haven't, you've been missing out. So you should definitely make sure to subscribe and ring that bell, and you will find out when all of our videos come out and every time that we go live on stream. That is every Monday and Friday, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern, but also this was a bit of a surprise, because last week when we ended JAR, we told you that we were going to be going back to Battle for Zendikar / Oath of the Gatewatch, which we are still planning on doing.
Yes.
But that's not what this is, obviously. And so if you have the bell rung, you will find out about these videos immediately and find out whether that is something that you want to watch or not. Don't forget, we have other channels as well. So if you want to see more Dave, you may have to wait a little while on Video Games for All, but he'll be there. So definitely go ahead and subscribe and ring the bell there, and at Gluten Free for All as well. Those links are down in the description box below. But for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And also Joe, apparently. David.
For those who may have forgotten. And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.